Welcome to the Five Thread Podcast, episode 2 of season 3. And I was so happy to have Simon Gresswell on this episode. Me and Simon have talked quite a lot over the past couple of years about how products are changing. So his background, he's got 30 years experience in licensing and merchandise. And so we really kind of dig into, well, what is that? And what does those terms mean? How can we rethink that model? So potentially, how has digital changed that model? And how can we look at that in new ways? So what does the future bring? And one of the really interesting things for me that Simon kind of pulled out and stressed to me that I hadn't really thought about was still the importance of the connection with physical merch, and also the part that free merch plays in building loyalty with fans. And we kind of dig into some of the conflicts of interest around the sustainability aspects of that, and potentially what clubs could do, especially when we look at the replica fan shirt model in terms of really disrupting that industry. So it was a fascinating conversation, and it's always fantastic to speak to Simon because he's got such a lot of experience and a long background in the sector to really kind of understand how can we take that knowledge, but really think about how we can change things for the future. So welcome to the Five Thread Podcast, Simon. I am so happy to have this conversation with you. We have chatted now for probably like the last couple of years, on and off. And I thought it's a great opportunity to kind of get you on the podcast. And I was looking at your bio, and you've done everything from like working on Mr. Men to Star Wars to UEFA. And I'm so intrigued by licensing and merchandise. So I wondered, first of all, if you could start with a bit of an introduction into your background, but also into what is licensing and merchandise for anybody who isn't kind of from this sector.
Yeah. Well, hello again, Joe, and everybody who's listening. So I started in licensing best part of 30 years ago, and initially with a licensee, a company called Copyright Stationery, who were a very prominent licensee at that stage in the marketplace. Actually run by two Mancunians, Man City fans, I should say. No one's perfect, but two amazing characters. I didn't fall into it. I mean, I did apply with the sort of combination of design, product development, and end product that somebody could see in the shops as the sort of appeal of licensing. So I joined that company. Worked on a myriad of different things. Core products were stationery and licensed bags being everything backpacks to pencil cases to wallets. Worked with some amazing brands. I even remember actually the brief that I answered to get the job was designing a set of stationery for Greenpeace. And to be fair, I think we ended up, the range we did wasn't dissimilar to what I put forward. So I'm massively blowing my own trumpet there, but it felt like a good fit. So that was great. Met a lot of good people there. And then having done the licensee role, looked at the other parts of the licensing industry and joined what is kind of commonly known in this country, at least, as one of the universities of licensing, Copyright Promotions, into a broad team of people, all kind of mainly young, free and single, all working hard and playing hard. And as the biggest agent and the biggest agent internationally across Europe, we got to represent a whole raft of properties. You mentioned things like Mr. Men and Star Wars. On top of that was the whole Hanna-Barbera cartoon portfolio, and a whole raft of other things to boot. I mean, we probably represented 40 or 50 different properties, and we're divided down by either category or discipline, I guess. And I think quite fortuitously, rather than just going in on product side, I was working on developing FMCG promotions, so in-pack and on-pack promotions, as were allowed in those days. So everything from working with cereal companies to soft drinks companies to the fast food retailers, our friends at McDonald's, etc. And then also trying to develop what I suppose then would just call the leisure area, which covered a whole raft of things, latterly known as location-based entertainment, even getting into that area, working with the development of branded and licensed slot machines and quiz games. So I was very lucky to do the initial monopoly in Cluedo machines as a license. And I don't think the company that took the license would mind me saying kind of made up the business model, but it worked very well for them and for the agency, and obviously for the rights holders as well. And those things really took off. And then had the also fortune to work with the world of advertising. So I guess most famously, I monetized the sort of second coming of the Mr. Men Glasgow's Smiles Better campaign with Glasgow District Council, and then also did a lot of what I think David Bourne now calls clip licensing, which is using different clips of mainly of animation actually to promote and advertise different sorts of brands and services. So quite a lot of insurance companies use it, as they do now as well. A couple of car companies. What do I remember? Posted campaign with Vauxhall, keeping up with the Indiana Joneses, that sort of thing, and had a lot of fun doing that. So very quickly, I got into two strands of the licensing industry, got to understand how the full, as it were, supply chain worked, and got involved in that. So even in the first role, yes, I was involved in design, product development, but also visiting factories and suppliers. So really understanding, hopefully, the whole chain. A little less so with the agency, but such a myriad of different things to be exposed to. Great understanding of clients and brands that became partners, and of course retailers, which from that time onwards became more and more important and more influential. What he did ask me about was the the kind of nature of what licensing is, and I'm always at pains to describe and differentiate between licensing and merchandising. Licensing itself, pretty much the act of giving someone permission to use rights or assets or intellectual property under a strict set of commercial and financial terms, and merchandising itself mostly associated more with the physical product itself. So the development, the design, the product manufacture, and then the delivery into and activation at retail. Why do I make that difference? Because in particular with regard to sport, that difference is quite acute. So everybody refers to that area as merchandising in sport, whether it's the kit of a football club or whether it's the souvenirs in the club shop. Everything is kind of physical. Everything is just understood under one title umbrella word of merchandising. Whereas licensing is much more about brand extension for sports brands and sports IP. Do you take your brand into, let's say, collaborate with another brand? Do you take your brand into the world of, as things I mentioned, like, I guess, location-based entertainment? You see what Formula One have done going into the F1 arcades, which are exploding around the world now, and their karting experience at Tottenham. If you can bring an authentic taste and an experience of the sport itself, again, they're a great example because they promote it so well with Drive to Survive and other things. But if you're able to do that, then you're bringing fans as close into the sport as you can. So I don't say that to rule out merchandise as the sort of poorer cousin. That was always the first relative, as it were, in the sporting world. But things have progressed beyond the physical world in merchandise to obviously things that are purely digital, a lot of microtransactions within gaming and within apps and with mobile games over the years. And probably that's where the industry has developed, but not necessarily kept pace with the development of tech. So we've got some more and more sophisticated licensing deals happening, but probably on the merchandise side, it's still very much thought of as the poor relation. How do I normally say it? I normally say it's the junior relative in the commercial pyramid of sport, and so it therefore doesn't necessarily command, I think, the right amount of attention from the business of sport. It's very much a tangible link to fans. I've banged down about this before, but obviously during the pandemic, physical product and innovative product that you could use or play with at home was pretty much the only tangible link that a lot of football clubs and other sporting entities had with their fans. And I still think as well that albeit we need to be careful on the sustainability front of what we do and what we promote. The reward for a fan being something physical or being some offer, discount, some form of reward is something that really we expect in other retail areas. So if you hold a loyalty card at a supermarket, or as was used to be through petrol companies, or through your daily coffee fix, Costa or otherwise, you are used to getting something for free or something back. In sport, we don't have much of that. There's not a lot of giving back of well, frankly, freebies. I think in the activation of certain like collectibles, you have freebies at the start in stickers and trading cards and that kind of thing. But it feels to me like what is actually a natural part of people's lifestyle is not really activated that well in sport. Certainly not in the UK, perhaps Europe, more so in the US, where they have obviously a plethora of other categories that we can only dream about. But it's a pretty fundamental thing, really, that doesn't happen necessarily in the world of sport. So I obviously always bat for licensing and merchandising, but I do think it's slightly underrated. And one of my great old colleagues at IMG had a phrase that she used to use and I adopted, which is licensing punches above its weight. And pretty much every major event you'll see around the world, if you come back 4 years later, you'll see a fan pitch up with something that they bought at the event or tournament 4 years previously. So that sort of staying power and that sort of exposure for brands is something that a lot of, let's say, my colleagues in the business of sport with bigger brains and, let's say, bigger fish to fry probably don't pay enough attention to, and or think is something that's doable kind of at the last minute, because we live in an Amazon-led push-button society where you press a keyboard on one afternoon and the next morning your product arrives. So, as I say, heavily biased towards what it can do. I do think going forward, and I'm sure we'll come on to talking about it, there are a lot more opportunities for including and exploiting tech within the world of merchandise and in licensing. And I do think that it's been a little slow to adopt things beyond the obvious adoption of e-commerce. Even some of the points of delivery and the types of functions and feature that you expect as a consumer and as a fan in your daily life with, again, let's say those retailers that suck all our money, supermarkets, coffee houses, etc. There's a lot more that can be done, a lot more that probably should be done in the sports merchandise world to reward its fans and allow them to operate and live in exactly the same way. That makes sense?
Definitely makes sense. And I had a lovely chat with Jo Redfern. She's on episode 1 of this series, and
fantastic.
She literally blew my mind. It was really hard to ask her questions because she'd give me an answer and it was like, oh my goodness. And she talked about how sport is changing. You've been in the business for 30 years and it seems to really have significantly changed in the last few years. We were talking about the idea that actually, now you don't necessarily have a terrestrial TV in your house. Everything is through an app. And so how does that kind of change the dynamic? So the way that we view and consume sport, the way fandom has changed. And we talked about the fact that maybe a lot of organizations are ready for this. And I'm really interested, given that you've had such a substantial career, how you've seen that change, but also how you predict it's going to change going forward.
Yeah. Well, actually, one really good example is after those first couple of companies I mentioned, I went to work. I took an opportunity to go and work abroad. We set up a new division of a company, the Continuity Company, now known as TCC Global, specialists in short-term loyalty programs. So creating promotional programs for 10, 12, 14 weeks with supermarkets. And I was brought in really, I think, to both develop the concepts for products and also deliver the licensing rights to do that. And I unashamedly set out a 5-year strategy, which was all based around football, the most popular thing in the world, and set off on a bit of an adventure to go and negotiate and gather rights from different national federations, from different major clubs, and indeed from players as well. And I mean, it's worth saying at this point as well, Joe, that this is at the time when, yes, Topps and Panini existed, but they were pretty much the only kind of mainstream collectibles out there with clout and with history and heritage behind them. But what really attracted me to that company was they had already done a few sports collections in other parts of the world, mainly in Australia, New Zealand, and in Asia, where they were using the rights to national teams, most notably rugby league in Australia and rugby union in New Zealand, the All Blacks, just around the 1995 World Cup. And they were developing, little figurines and other collectibles. And I looked at these things and the kind of logic and the mechanics of the promotions and thought, yeah, I remember doing that as a kid. I remember collecting foils for the FA Cup winners and medals with SO and Shell and whoever else it was, and thought, I get that. I understand it. That mechanic resonates with me. And if I'm being given the opportunity to develop those things, honestly, I believe in them. And so that was a good fit. And the whole reason I mentioned that is because as you talked about how have things changed, again, specifically mentioned collectibles and figurines in particular, but also trading cards and stickers. Everyone, lots of people will have grown up, and there are a lot of what you could call big kids and big boys and girls out there still collecting things that they did when they were kids, and now looking at them as very valuable retro pieces and heritage pieces. But there in itself is a sort of, let's call it an umbrella category of collectibles, where the physical is still very, very important. And although there have been many, many attempts to digitize and bring those things into the digital world, the metaverse, whatever you want to call it, actually the physical touch or almost the currency of holding a piece of metal as a coin or a sticker or a trading card, or being able to trade in the playground, or carry around and brag to your friends that what you have and what they don't have, and the again the sort of fundamental mechanism of how you obtain those things by regular spend. So all these short-term loyalty programs were based on frequency of spend and level of spend. So if you imagine you're going and spending 50 quid in the supermarket every week, for every £10 or $10, or as was back then, guilders when we were based in Holland, you would receive either a point or a free something, and you built it into a collection. So, in many respects, things that were from my very early childhood, even remembering Green Shield stamps, that's how bloody old I am, and also then, other collectibles. I understood that, appreciated it, and thought, I think that's a mechanism that is always going to be valid. And 20, 30 years later, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, it is. And actually, it's one of those particular areas that hasn't really been overtaken by the digital world, although it's been tried. So I think I say that as a balance, really, because there are a lot of things that have developed more into digital, and whether it's the nature of what a piece of IP is, like an NFT, or something that's a phygital product where you've got something that could just exist in a digital form, and obviously with all the sustainability benefits that has, but then could be by choice or by selection or by luck be transformed into a physical product. Here's a sort of overall category that's managed to survive the course of time. And I think it comes down to the connection that people have, both with sport and it being obviously passion based, but then also the connection with the product, let's call it the byproduct, the collectibles, whether it's the figurines, the little kind of the physical and tangible and tactile nature of those, or the currency of stickers and trading cards. And so, long way of saying, I got into that because I believed in it. And that's perhaps a very long way of saying everyone should believe in what they do and have a passion for what they do. But I really have stayed involved in that area ever since. So I did 4 years at that company, but still did business with them afterwards as a consultant, getting rights for them, and also then actually selling a couple of collections with them and on their behalf. But I've also always taken most clients back to look at that area and say, in the appropriate territories, here is something that you wouldn't necessarily think of doing if you're just thinking about merchandise products, or you're just thinking about the usual licensing categories, but are incredibly powerful. And with the right client, with the right approach to it, these things can deliver amazing volumes, amazing revenues, for an amazing uptick for a retailer in spend through a short term period, which ultimately, that sort of competitive advantage is what they're all looking for all the time. So it's yeah, it's changed quite a lot, but a lot has remained very similar. And I suppose what I've said already is that's kind of a good thing and kind of a bad thing. I just think there's a lot more that can be done in the area, and with a bit more focus. And I'll use that word that makes rights holders shudder is investment in this area. More could be done, and I hope that I can help influence what is going to be done going forward with some of the brands and events and federations that I work with. But it is an uphill struggle, and just as we know, because we talk about a lot with regard to sustainability, it's the area of developing and innovating in merchandise and licensing is seen a little bit like sustainability. It's being nice to have, and we'll do what we can do, but ultimately, if there's another cost centre attached to one of those things, then it gets the same scrutiny and diligence and or short change that other new areas do as well. So yeah, it's an interesting time for where things can go. And I probably haven't talked enough about the necessities with regard to sustainability, but again, I'm sure we'll come on to that with regard to kit and the things that you know about a lot more than I do.
Oh, I'm ready to dig into that, Simon. But just something that came to mind there, because I hadn't really thought about this kind of relationship between the digital and this physical need for collectibles.
Yeah.
Do you think there's been any change within those collectibles in terms of because they've had to really own their place, that they've become better quality? Or do you think it's gone the opposite way, where we just almost had more of them because we needed to have a physical presence out there? You kind of seen any change within like the design and the makeup of those physical products or not?
Yeah, I mean, you have, and again, go back to the easiest example, the collector cards and trading cards and stickers, that sort of thing. They've added to that product category by creating different types of gameplay, creating different values to each of the individual products. So if you're buying or getting as a reward a pack of 3 or 5 cards, then in there somewhere is going to be something that's got some foiling on, or something that appears to be a bit more valuable, and or is more rare. So it gives you, again, more currency to trade with your friends. But I quite like the fact that most of that has remained very tangible, very tactile, as I said earlier. And really, it's like, for me, as a more mature chap these days, it's a little bit like having notes in your wallet. I don't have any these days, but if I did have, I'd still pull out and think that in my hand feels like value. Because I remember passing those over the bar, 20, 30, 40 years plus ago. So I think you have that sort of strange affinity with it, and that probably comes with whatever your generation is, whatever your background is. But I think it's almost a heritage and a kind of retro circle that people not only of my age who used to do that when they were younger, but youngsters and the younger generations now still look at that and like that physical side of things. It again raises a difficult and fundamental challenge with regards to sustainability in terms of just producing more and more and more. But I've never really seen the digital side of that take off in the way that perhaps everyone expected. A little bit like, even more fundamental, we've still got newspapers, we've still got books, and I, for one, hope both of those never die. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, someone would have told you there'll be no print in 10 or 20 years. Clearly, that's not the case, and is probably never going to be. I think we have the same element of traditionalism and nostalgia in the world of merchandising. I read a story just yesterday about Maradona's shirt, the Hand of God shirt from, let's think, what was that? That was what was it? Not Italia 94, it must have been. Is that right? 94? I don't know. Anyway, back then, and dear Steve Hodge, who managed to swap his shirt with Maradona at the end of the game, and decided to sell it, and it sold for, I don't know, £7.5 million or something outlandish. Single most valuable piece of merch ever. Now, if that doesn't sort of prove that there's value in getting hold of something, retaining it, and just sitting on it and watching its value grow, then I don't know what does. So yeah, it's I say I have a bit of a dilemma in that I'm happy that and nostalgic there are things that have remained the same and remained as powerful and remained as strong. Just like my favourite promotional mechanism is probably still free. It's simple, but pretty much everyone likes something for free. And in reality, I like the idea of progress and, evolution and development. Not so progress is the wrong word. I like the idea of evolution and development, certainly into the digital world. But I think certain pegs fit certain holes in that respect, and it's nice that you've got a mixture of things to delve into, and therefore they still appeal, I think, to across a wide demographic and different generations as well.
Definitely. I do feel like there is a trend now for people actually wanting a physical thing. I've just seen that I think it's ID magazine is coming back, after it went into administration. Yeah. People actually kind of wanting something physical that's had almost like a bit of a craft. It's got a value to it. But I would like to dig into my favorite subject, which is often, I'm only the person that likes to talk about this, but I know you are happy to discuss it. But football shirts and the business model and sustainability. Yeah. We've talked about it a lot, but yeah. I'm really kind of interested in your perspective. We know that there is, different trade-offs or conflict of interest between that commercial business model of just selling more and more kit and it becoming quite a disposable item now, even though it's quite expensive for a fan. And potentially other ways that we could consider that business model, new innovations that are coming in. And given your experience, what do you think about all of that? Any good examples, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an area where, well, again, I remember from a previous discussion, you've got to look at it and say, well, it's ripe for disruption because you've got a huge amount of people buying a single type of item, across 20, 30, 92 clubs every single year or every season. So you look at that in the same way as you look at the car buying market or other retail markets and say that should be different. It should be done in a more efficient way or in a better way for the customers, the fans. And that's probably where it falls down most because it is, and a massive sweeping generalization here, but because it is purely profit driven and about what money the clubs make and the kit manufacturers make, there's an imbalance. There's a natural imbalance. If it was viewed as a sort of service industry in that it's helping fans to show their colours, literally, then I think there's a route to disrupt and move into a subscription model or move into a fully circular model. And the subscription model, and it doesn't really matter if it's accurate or not. It's just kind of concept at this stage, but again, with that mass of people buying something on a regular basis, there are so many other examples in other industries where that's been converted into subscription. And ultimately, and not very long after, let's call it the brand owner, the rights holder, has not lost out. And in fact, what they've done is retain and grow the loyalty of those customers, or in this case of sport, fans, and probably made more money out of them over time. So it baffles me that a club or a sporting federation or entity doesn't move into that area and try to maximize it. But then it's an age-old problem in any area or in any industry of who leads and who follows. And we're blessed, obviously, in our Isles with several football clubs owned by quite wealthy entities around the world who, to all intents and purposes, money is no object. And therefore, I think it's a massive opportunity, both in a sort of PR context, but also just a purpose-led context for somebody to take that jump, that leap of faith and say, we're going to completely disrupt and we are going to only sell shirts on subscription model. So if you buy one from us, you've got to buy one for the next 5 years. But if you buy one from us and you return it next year, we'll give you number 2 for 10% less, 15% less. Of course, I can't do the back of a fag packet maths, but whatever the model is, there has to be a way to make that work, to retain the loyalty of the fans and to grow them. And that, again, fundamentally, I think is the fact that fans are treated like, not like customers, right? They're treated like, I don't know, some sort of bonus element to.
I mean, the word for me is commodity. That's what's come up in there.
That's a great word, and that's the right word as well. And so you get that feeling in the same way as you do when you deal with, and again, I'm talking huge stereotypically here, but with estate agents or car salesmen or replacement window salespeople, that you're being kind of shafted basically and stiffed in some way because you're just another customer to them. And trust me, as we were talking about it earlier, even buying a new house that we're doing at the moment, sometimes you just feel like another customer, not someone that's parting with a huge chunk of cash. So I think sport has a lot to learn in that respect. And I see a lot of dialogue and discussion amongst colleagues in the industry about engagement, about retention, all with really kind of quite fancy, funded, new ways of doing things. And actually, I still look at the area of physical and perhaps even digital product and rewards for fans as loyal customers as a massive missed opportunity. If you look in magazines and online, there are still insurance companies offering an M&S voucher when you sign up or a nice pen when you sign up. Those methods work. They're super simple. They're not very sophisticated. They might not look like you're very clever in offering that, but they work. So I think sometimes there's an opportunity to do things in a simpler way. But as I said at the start, an entity has got to be prepared to take the hit. And for me, it has to be one of those clubs, let's say, more so probably than the federation, that have the opportunity and the financial robustness behind them to say, yeah, we're going to make a change and we're going to disrupt this lifestyle activity for good. Because if one leads, others will follow. And that's also with great respect to Brentford and the CEO there, who steadfastly a couple of years ago said we're going to keep the same kit for the following season. I think he got plenty of plaudits for that, which is great. Or the club got plenty of plaudits, which is great. Some joked and said, well, they don't need another kit because they haven't got new sponsors or whatever it may be. But the reality is that was about doing what they can, about making a move in a certain area. And I think I mentioned to you, Joe, I had a great chat, actually a walk and talk meeting with a senior person from a British sports federation, who obviously I won't name the federation or the person. And I found that one of their fears was what they were able to tell the world about what they were doing, for fear of not being judged or being seen to not do enough. And we kind of agreed, after chatting about it for a couple of minutes, that it's much more about doing what you can than it is about trying to do everything and change the world. So here I am. I've got two ends of the scale here. I've got someone, yes, albeit senior in a British sporting federation, concerned about what they do, but I'm also poking the beast and saying, okay, big club, City, Newcastle, whoever it may be, you should be the ones taking the step and disrupting the market. Well, a smaller club can't do it for sure because they probably rely too heavily on the revenue. And I think that argument would probably be used by the biggest clubs. But when you look at, say, what Barcelona did with having UNICEF on the front of their shirt for don't know, 2, 3 seasons, where my understanding was, whether that's true or not, but my understanding was, that was not a sponsorship. That was about them, highlighting a purpose and funding in the other way. So I think there are, given the shirt is in this marketplace and in our sports, in UK and European sports, differentiated from American sports, is a billboard, albeit a tightly controlled one across different sports. Why not use that billboard to highlight one of your biggest purposes? And one of the things that is absolutely relevant and fundamental to everyone watching, not just your fans. So I think there's an opportunity in it. I'm probably talking very hypothetically, and it sounds very high and mighty. And yes, as I've said already, I haven't done the maths, and haven't come up with a perfect model. But I would love to think that some of the people that I know, certainly, let's say in Premier League football clubs, there's some very bright people in those clubs, that they are working either with their kit manufacturers or just internally with their own senior management on making that change or doing something. I do think the obviously initially the Green Football Weekend and the Great Save campaign that's out now, peppered with players, kind of fronted by Ali McCoist, that's going to get people thinking. Most importantly, not only fans, but it's going to get other footballers thinking. One, because either they're in it or they're not in it in terms of profile, but secondarily, they will see that that's the right thing to do and the right thing to promote. And so, I laugh at the moment when you see things like Ronaldo. Actually, that's a great example. So Ronaldo, okay, so he gives this huge injection in the arm to the sport of paddle by streaming paddle, whatever it was, championships on his YouTube channel to countless hundreds of millions, whatever it is. I get that, but fundamentally behind that, there is a commercial mutual benefit for both those entities. Yet this is the man that sat behind a desk in a news conference at one of the Football World Cups. I'm guessing, I can't remember, it must have been Qatar, and made a joke about Coca-Cola and the bottle sitting on the desk in front of him, effectively in his mind feeding off his fame. Imagine how useful it would have been if Cristiano had said, not Coca-Cola, but it said single-use plastic. That's ridiculous. Anyone that followed him at least would digest that message, make their own mind up about what that means and what they do. And in particular for kids, let's say more impressionable ages, would probably think, oh, Cristiano's into sustainability. That's cool. So again, I'm picking on major stars and major organisations, but it goes back to the do what you can thing. If I have that chat with the person last week from the federation and say, it's fine, everyone is about doing what you can, that's one thing. But it should go right to the top of the tree as well. And Mr. Ronaldo and others should be playing their part. I've been lucky to be involved in some projects for other sustainability orientated and sustainability based sports and new sporting leagues and series. Most notably recently with the E1 series, the electric boat series, which is an amazing setup, huge amount of fantastic tech in there. And, at its heart is about changing, mobility on water, and using electric power, not diesel power or engine power. These sorts of drives forward are great, and they've done an amazing job on bringing in celebrities into that. You've got, Rafa Nadal fronting a team. You've got Tom Brady. You've got Will Smith, and several other, high-profile celebrities. But that's going to take a while to catch on, get traction, and, to be honest, filter down to the masses, because obviously it's a wealthy person's sport, and most of the locations are pretty fancy at the moment. They're more akin to Formula One, but with 1.5 seasons behind it so far. But the aim and the purpose that they have behind them is incredibly interesting. And therefore, when I worked on a project with them, my start point was, well, clearly you want all your merchandise and your kit to be fully sustainable because that is your ultimate goal. And I'm not criticizing them here, but actually their focus was more, how do we get our teams and our crew kitted out? And this is not an area we can focus on in terms of either one, investing, as I've said, or two, kind of proliferating in terms of doing it in a sustainable way. So, and again, I should emphasise, it's not to highlight them in a negative way. Lots of the different sports federations do that. I was lucky to go along a couple of times to the Formula E, and that's now been running 10, 12 seasons, I think. And I think very openly they grappled with how to create sustainable merchandise and or getting enough attention and focus on it. Probably the ones that have done it the best from the off, SailGP, and have been vocal about it, but rightly so. And they're about as uniform in their purpose across the board in all commercial areas as probably any sports entity or league has ever been, because they're a relative newbie, but they stuck to their word and they stuck to their principles and they stuck to their purpose, and that has to be applauded. So it'd be great to look at that and think, in 5 years, 10 years time, that's the norm of every major sport or every major league, that they are sticking to, for want of a better expression, the right purposes, not just profit and exposure. So yeah, in terms of other models, I guess we talk as well quite a bit about circularity, whether that's possible. Again, fundamentally, that's a very tricky model to completely implement, but I think what the Great Save campaign is probably shows that sort of thing is possible, and sows the seed at least. I wonder as well about going forward about even simple messaging. So if you take merchandise of, let's say, one of our biggest, most favourite teams in this country, the FA, the England football team, they're a not-for-profit organisation. On their swing tags, on their products, you'll see a message that says all the profits from the sale of this item, garment, are invested back into football. Even that alone is something that other sports can take a lesson from and look at, adding to that a line about sustainability or about product origin or about the benefits of the type of products rather than the obvious harmful effects. I think there are simple ways to do things. And I also think that we've seen a lot of innovation in the development of football kits from different materials, different substrates, whether it's coffee waste, coffee grounds, or bamboo, all sorts of different things, all of which I think have been amazing. And they, these natural substances have some amazing qualities as well, wicking qualities and things that we as humans think we have to develop and create and manufacture, but they exist already. So I have quite a lot of hope for some very clever people in a lab growing substances in the future that can be made into core items for, let's say, sports merchandise, kit, and other sorts of apparel. What that is, I don't know, but from my very limited exposure to those sorts of things, nature is a lot better at it than we are. They're able to protect, to cool, to warm, to repel, all sorts of different challenges. So we should learn from that. And I do think that there's a role for science in the innovation space as well. And just as you were talking about in your post earlier on this morning, Joe, on LinkedIn, the use of tech in developing, let's say, cooling performance apparel for athletes. When we've seen at the Aussie Open ridiculous temperatures. I think you highlighted George Russell and losing whatever it was, 4 kg in one of the Grand Prix. I mean, crazy conditions, and the sports various are at existential levels with regard to where the climate is heading. So Yeah, I'd like to think that the investment that is channeled into tech developments mainly focused on attracting, engaging, and retaining eyeballs and subscriptions to streaming channels or satellite channels or whatever they may still be could also be diverted into investment behind technical apparel that calls. I mean, actually, when you look at it again, think about one of those examples, the Australian Open. It's 2025 and we're sending people to the moon and back, albeit some went up to the space station for 8 days and came back 9 months later. But we're sending people to the moon and back regular basis and various other incredible scientific discovery missions and journeys. Yet the players put some sort of ice towels around their necks to keep them cool and have a ball girl or ball boy with an umbrella over the top of them. You think, well, I mean, yeah, I love tradition, and I'd probably expect that at Wimbledon, different colour towel. You'd expect it at Wimbledon, but where's the tech? We laughed as recently as Qatar when they started developing the stadia. We laughed at the fact they said there were going to be aircon stadia. Well, one, yep, they have the money to do it. Two, they have the punishing climate that meant that was important to do. Three, it's achievable. You only need to go to Dubai to go on an indoor ski slope where outside it's 30, 40 degrees and indoor you're sliding down snow to know these things are possible. However, obviously, a critical point is how they're done, how they're implemented, and whether they themselves then have sustainability and climate implications as well. So I think there's a lot to go at, but I suppose where I started on that point is I think nature knows best, and if we keep investigating and borrowing from nature, we'll probably find some better ways of looking after athletes in all the different environments in which sports played.
I mean, I think there's so much in that what you've said, Simon. I mean, I, like you, speak to a lot of people within organizations who really want to make change, and they feel a bit stuck in their role because potentially they don't have the power or the influence within the greater organization, but they just want to do good and do the best that they can in their role. And I think we should really applaud that. I think in sustainability, there is a lot of hypocrisy thrown around. If you're not perfect, then people are quite happy to point that out. And I think we all need to almost work at this. How could we be 1% better? And something that I talk a lot to my clients is, I'm just one person, but you could affect hundreds of millions if you can affect, fan behavior. And taking that conversation, being much more constructive with it, I think is really important. And something that is also somewhere where I've seen a lot of progress is really more in like grassroots sport. So, Anton, who's been on the podcast, they made a football shirt from cradle to cradle gold certified materials, very transparent supply chain. The other week I was sat next to somebody who worked for Port Vale, and they literally said, do you know what we do with our third kit? We basically use the away kit from the season before, and then the season after, it's our third kit. And I was like, oh my goodness. It's, sometimes the solutions don't have to be over complex. And I think, maybe sport has been a little bit behind with this. And also the resistance towards tech, I do wonder whether actually if we have to start mitigating against things like heat and climate crisis, it's clear evidence that actually that is happening and we need to respond. And so far, I haven't seen those tech innovations, really kind of be commonplace within sport. And I think it's almost that we're going to get to a tipping point where we will see it, but that will almost be testament to actually we have a problem and what is sports part in that. And the Premier League released their sustainability statement recently. And what I found interesting was circular economy was in there. And I was like, okay, so we are at least putting the language into this. So yeah, I'm also a bit with you wondering who's going to be the first mover in this space. I think there's so much opportunity, whether it is almost like the subscription model or whether it is just actions like Brentford have done or Port Vale. I think the need to see action is more urgent than ever. And I think fans will respect that and almost become more loyal to the organizations that are doing it. Just before we kind of wrap up, I'm really keen to kind of dig into, if you had the power or the crystal ball to make whatever changes that you could, how would you change this model? And also we haven't talked about products of change, which I would really also like to cover, but just some kind of final thoughts on, where could we go with all of this?
In terms of kit in particular and short shirts, well, again, like I said, I didn't do the maths properly or haven't done yet, but I look at it compared to other industries and think there's a disruption there that's possible. If in the music industry, Billie Eilish can release a new album and all of the merch associated with it is fully sustainable, then there's no reason why a sports person, club, or entity can't do that as well. It's a decision. It's a financial or a business decision at the end of the day, and it's about keeping true to her values. And you can be damn sure that she insisted on that. So those sports stars, and been lucky in the past to chat with Hannah Mills, amazing Team GB Olympic sailor, and now SailGP sailor as well, and she's been highly applauded, I think, by the IOC, rightly so, for her campaign to, let's say, keep the oceans clean, because she's completely aware that it's an existential tipping point, as you've alluded to. If conditions continue to be poor, and or water quality or coastal erosion continues at the rate that it's going, then her sport is under threat. So the subscription model seems like the obvious one because of the current reality. I don't think we'll flip to full circularity quickly, but I think that can be a byproduct of subscription. If you imagine doing the subscription model for 5 years, people are effectively playing their part in circularity, and then perhaps another 5 years on, when enough old kit's been gathered, then the whole system could, in theory, take care of itself. So you've got to get obviously to a critical mass point of view, or point in that progress, where there's enough material to be circulated round. I think the other things that the other elements that can have a massive influence and play a massive part in this are basically players themselves in any sport. But if we're talking football, some of the players, some of the influencers and creators in the world of football, and of course I'm looking at whether it's the RPK and the Kings League, whether it's the Sidemen and the Boers League, and their charity games in particular, they're having an influence everywhere else they touch with regard to product and lifestyle. So they have to have an influence in this as well. And from my being selfish, I think even in the world of merchandise, they could completely redefine what that means as well, be it physical or digital or combination of both. But I also think fans should be, one, rewarded by participation in the process, and secondarily used in a way and allowed to help. So we do endless research and endless surveys on all sorts of other areas. I think if fans were allowed, just much like Nike and Adi have done with, again, I probably get the names wrong, but I think Adi Studio, where they allowed some of their consumers to design things, probably from a set of pre-approved design assets, graphic elements, etc. But both companies experimented with allowing their fans to develop new product. Listen to the fans. There's got to be a way to move this thing forward. And I wonder, actually, I probably was very kind to all the major clubs earlier on and said, oh, hopefully they're all doing this because they're very smart people in there. But they all have a huge amount of commercial priorities. So maybe no one is out there creating a survey for would 50% of our fans actually subscribe to a subscription model for kit or not. Maybe that's never been done. No one's told me it has been, so maybe it hasn't been done. But I think the fans need to be, have some skin in that game, so to speak, and be allowed to do more with their club and probably for their club as well. So not necessarily about kit, but I think one of the other things you've heard me talk about is what I tend to call DIY merchandise, but that standing for design it yourself, where much like the Nike and Adi example, people are, as fans, able to take a suite of pre-approved assets and create their own product, through print on demand, which is an absolutely standard thing that you can do in most other retailers. So I think there are things like that which could come along, which could make the whole area of kit, but also who's involved in the process, a much more sort of wholesome and holistic process. And for me, that, such as the area that I operate in, that's a way that you could be involved and rewarded as a fan, which is probably more exciting than just being able to sign up to a broadcast subscription.
Well, there's the challenge that you've set right there, Simon. I mean, first of all, let's get this survey done. It's been an absolute joy chatting to you. I'm sure we will have plenty of conversations about this in the future as well. Just before we finish, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish I had, or anything you'd like to say before we finish?
I don't think so. I'm just trying to think. I think the one thing I do say, I talk about the pandemic and the impact that had on everyone's lives, and obviously the world of sport. But I do think that was there's two examples, that being a little bit of proof that merchandise is really important as a connection and a connector and something tangible, and I've seen it with my own eyes at Football World Cups or Euros or Rugby World Cups, seeing people 4 years later, 2 years later, with merchandise that they bought and or wore to the previous event. I think that's brand exposure and brand loyalty gold that most other areas of the business of sport put under this title of engagement. Actually, licensing and merchandising has that all the time, and has it through the passion of fans. They probably don't exploit it or capitalize on it, better way to put it, as well as they could do, or with as much interest, investment and innovation as they could do.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for being our second guest on season 3. I know there's going to be so many people who are going to be fascinated by this, and just really grateful that you came on the podcast.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Lovely to talk to you as ever.
You too.